Hi friends, my name is Atman Prakash, HOD of English People's College. I have made this video to help the students of +3 first semester English Honours students of my state Odisha. In this video, I attempt to present the historical overview of 17th century English literature. This item forms a part of Unit 1 of your core paper 2. In English literature, 17th century was a time of great social and political disturbances. Remember, 17th century was a time of great social and political disturbances. This century, 17th century, is marked by civil war, regicide, restoration and the glorious revolution. Yes, students, this century witnesses all these upheavals, all these disturbances. There was a civil war, there was regicide, there was restoration and also a glorious revolution. The first half of this century, which roughly spans from the year 1603 to 1660, is known as the age of Milton, because John Milton was the greatest literary force of this period. The same period, that is from the year 1603 to 1660, can also be called the Puritan age, because Puritanism was also a dominant force during this period. Now, there is a question: who were the Puritans and what is Puritanism? The Puritans were a group of English-speaking Protestants. They were Protestants. English-speaking Protestants, they were dissatisfied with the religious reformation movement carried out during the reign of Elizabeth. The Puritans wanted a complete purification of Church of England, and they also wanted removal of practices such as hierarchical leadership, clerical vestment and various rituals which were associated with Rome. The Puritans stood for the belief of pure Christianity, and hence the name Puritans was adopted. The Puritans stood for the belief of pure Christianity. That is why they were called Puritans. A question may come to your mind: why I choose the year 1603 and 1660 to mark the beginning and ending of first half of 17th century? Listen friends, listen mindfully. I use the year 1603 to mark the beginning and use the year 1660 to mark the ending of the first half of 17th century, because the years 1603 and 1660 are important for us from historical perspective. In the year 1603, Queen Elizabeth died and James VI of Scotland, James VI or James VI of Scotland, became James I of England and ascended to the throne of England. He ruled up to 1625. After his demise, Charles I became the king. But during the kingship of Charles I, a civil war broke out and the king was beheaded. The king was executed. The civil war spanned from 1642 to 1651. This English civil war was a series of conflicts between Charles I and the parliamentarians. The supporters of King Charles were called the cavaliers and the parliamentarians were called roundheads. The roundheads mainly comprised of Puritan middle classes. The war ended with the victory of the parliamentarians. Charles I was executed while his son Charles II fled to France. all hopes of monarchy were demolished and the monarchical rule was replaced with a strong Puritan government or Commonwealth under Oliver Cromwell. For 12 years, till the death of Cromwell in 1659, the Puritans ruled the country. Afterwards, the Puritan government did not last long, and in 1660, Charles II was restored to throne. Hence, the term restoration is used. Restoration of Charles II to the throne put an end to the Puritan period. The first half of 17th century, that is 1603 to 1660, which marks the death of Elizabeth and continues up to the restoration, can be subdivided as follows. For the sake of convenience, we can subdivide them. First, the Jacobean period. It spans from 1603 to 1625. Then comes the Caroline period from 1625 to 1649. And then the Commonwealth period from 1649 to 1660. Now let us learn something more about the Jacobean period. The period from 1603 to 1625 in English literature is known as the Jacobean period. It is because in 1603 James I ascended to the throne and he ruled up to 1625. Viewers, you must learn that the term Jacobean is derived from the Latin word Jacobus, which refers to James I. From the literary viewpoint, this period is an extension of the Elizabethan age. But the optimism and the promise of Elizabethan era are missing in Jacobean literature. We see a somber, a serious, darker and doubting tone in the literature of this period. To explain this tendency of literature, it can be assumed that the conflict between the parliament and the king gave a darker and doubting tone to the literature of this time. The Jacobean period is followed by Caroline period. The Caroline age is named after Charles I. He reigned England for 24 years from 1625 to 1649. The word Caroline is derived from the word Carolus. The name Caroline is derived from the word Carolus. It is the Latin version of Charles. During Caroline period, 3 schools of poetry came into existence. They were metaphysical poetry, cavalier poetry, and Puritan poetry. Caroline period is deeply affected by political unrest and civil war. The civil war was fought between the cavaliers and the roundheads. Remember these two terms, the cavaliers and the roundheads. The supporters of the king were known as cavaliers and the supporters of parliament were known as roundhead. Most of the roundheads were the Puritans. Caroline age is characterized by civil war, rise of Puritanism, lack of spirit of unity, dominance of intellectual spirit, and decline of drama. Carolingian age was not an age of drama. The enactment of drama was discontinued due to civil war and puritanical attacks. The drama was discontinued. Sermons, pamphlets, history, and philosophy were written in prose. Metaphysical poetry was the main literary output during this period. Now let us learn more about the Commonwealth period. Commonwealth period, I mean 1649 to 1660. In this period, there was a rise of Puritanism. This is the period when there was no monarch in England. There was no king in England. After the death of Charles I, Oliver Cromwell, the Puritan leader, Oliver Cromwell was a Puritan leader, came to power. He died, Oliver Cromwell died in 1658, and his son Richard Campbell became the ruler of England, but he lacked authority. He ruled England till 1660. In this period, Puritanism became gradually unpopular. The English people realized that the monarchy was essential for them. The first half of 17th century produced a few immortal books like King James' version of Bible, Paradise Lost. However, the literature of the age is extremely diverse in character, and this diversity is due to the collapse of the ideals of political and religious unity. Political and religious unity was lost. The literature differs from that of the preceding age in three marked ways. Please note it. The preceding age was the Elizabethan age, and it was the golden age of English literature. The literature of 17th century differed from Elizabethan age in three fronts. First, the literature of this period has no unity of spirit. For example, in the days of Elizabeth, the patriotic enthusiasm of all classes used to unite all, but such sentiments were missing in this era. Second, in contrast to the hopefulness and vigor of Elizabethan writings, much of the literature of this period became somber and serious in character. The literature of 17th century saddens rather than inspires. Last but not the least, 17th century literature had lost the romantic impulse of youth, and it became more critical and intellectual. It makes us think but not prompt to feel deeply. Now let us focus our discussion on the second half of 17th century. Till now, I discussed the first half of 17th century. Now let us delve into the second half of 17th century. For the sake of convenience, the historians earmark the period from 1660 to 1700 as the age of Dryden or as the age of Restoration. This period is known as the age of Dryden or as the age of Restoration. John Dryden was the representative writer or the trend center of this period. Hence, it is legitimate to call this period as the age of Dryden. This period began with the restoration of King Charles II to the English throne. Therefore, this period is also called the Restoration period. There are three historical events which deeply influenced the life and literature of second half of 17th century. It must be kept in mind that this age is otherwise known as the age of Restoration or the age of Dryden. Those three historical events which influenced this half of 17th century are restoration of Charles II to the throne in 1660. Second, the religious and the political controversies, and the third most influential event was the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Restoration of Charles II to the throne in 1660 brought many changes. It brought about a revolution. All those activities that had once remained suppressed previously during the Puritan government surfaced again. Now the English people consciously engaged themselves in violent excesses. Theatres reopened. Beer and bull baiting revived. Sports, music, dancing, and all wild delights were practiced again. The king and many of the loyalists who returned from exile were heavily influenced by French cultural attitudes. They brought back with them French lifestyle and French standards. The previous Elizabethan age was dominated by Italian standards, but the Restoration age was dominated by French influence, and it continued through the next century. The king had no redeeming patriotism. He had neither the sense of responsibility to his country nor care for his countrymen. However, he had a number of mistresses and numerous children. Most of the time, he used to remain surrounded by corrupt and degenerate ministers. As a result, profligacy was glorified in the royal court and corruption was rampant in all walks of life. The Great Fire of 1665 and the plague that followed were popularly regarded as suitable punishments for the sins of the profligate and selfish king. While London was burning and the people were suffering, the king and his nobles were busy with their parties, with their revels. The utter degeneration of the nation was realized when a handful of Dutch navy swept the English fleet from the sea. During the Restoration period, there was a rapid development of science. The establishment of the Royal Society was a landmark in history of England. The interest in science began to grow. The growing interest in science resulted in the beginning of rational inquiry and scientific and objective outlook. Objectivity, rationality, and intellectual quality also enlivened the literature of this period. The religious and political controversies of this period. Now let us discuss on this point. The age witnessed the rise of two political parties, the Whigs and the Tories. These parties played a significant role in English politics. The Whigs sought to limit the royal powers in the interest of the people and the parliament, whereas the Tories supported the divine right theory of the king and tried to delimit the powers of the people in the interest of the hereditary rulers. The rise of these political parties gave a fresh importance to men of literary abilities. Almost all the writers of this period had political affiliations. For example, Dryden was a Tory and he used to advocate the cause of his monarch. The religious controversies were bitter in this age. The supporters of the previous regime were fanatically persecuted. The nation was predominantly Protestant and the Catholics were unduly harassed and they were marginalized. They were suspected. They had to pay higher taxes and were not permitted to hold any office under the crown. The intense hatred for Catholics influences the writings of this period. The religion of the king himself was doubtful. Although Charles II outwardly expressed support for Anglicanism, he had Catholic sympathies. Charles had no legitimate heir, but only a Catholic brother, James. It was certain that after Charles II, his brother James, who was a Catholic, would succeed to the throne. Efforts were made to exclude James from the throne. Anti-Catholic parliament led by Earl of Shaftesbury tried to prevent the coming of James to the throne. Charles, however, defended the royal line against Parliament's attempt to determine the succession. The return of tension and conflict between the king and Parliament led to the emergence of political faction or parties in Parliament. As a result, the parties about which I have already mentioned, Whigs and Tories, they surfaced. This whole attempt to exclude James from the throne was called the Exclusion Crisis. Charles ended this crisis, the king ended this crisis by dissolving the parliament. The king sided with his brother and he removed all obstacles for the accession of James. Finally, James too was crowned as the king in 1685. Dryden's famous poem, Absalom and Achitophel, reflects these religious and political conflicts of the day. The glorious revolution of 1688. This is also another influential event of this period. In this age, we see the glorious revolution which laid foundation of modern England. The glorious revolution, also called the revolution of 1688, and the bloodless revolution, took place from 1688 to 1689 in England. It involved the overthrow of the Catholic King James II, who was replaced by his Protestant daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William of Orange. Motives for the revolution were complex and included both political and religious concerns. The event ultimately changed how England was governed, giving Parliament more power over the monarchy and planting seeds for the beginning of a political democracy. Students, according to your syllabus, the following subpoints need to be discussed. They are metaphysical poetry, cavalier poetry, comedy of humors, masques, beast fables. In my next video, I will deal all these points. Thank you.